one testimony that there also exists a police standard that FLETC has provided, and I'll let him validate those statements. But so the Post Commission came together, and as a member of the Post Commission, we voted, quorum was set, the majority won, and so we came up with that standard and proposed it for law. It's my opinion that after 3 years, the Post Commission is coming back to you and saying, look, it didn't work. It's something that we've implemented. We thought it was a good idea, but it's not meeting the intent. And while the intent was to produce healthy, physically fit law enforcement, peace officers to serve our community, there is unintended consequences, and that is why we're here today. Because really, the lowering or the creation of the interim standard is really to save those people who are where the unintended consequences are coming in. We actually have an above 50% pass rate with the old stand, with the original standard. But we've determined that, look, there are individuals in that other side of the percentage that can still do the job, that can still complete the mission in respect to the fire service and all our different mission sets and different units assigned to. So it's not saying that the original post test that we, via the AFI is hard. It's saying, we're coming to you saying it's inappropriate for what we need. I believe that each of us can come up with an appropriate, validated work performance evaluation or test with physical fitness requirements per our mission sets. And each of us have said it, many times before, that there does exist standards out there. And I'm here to say that we need to apply the appropriate standard, because I was just here last week, Friday, talking about implementing standards. And a senator who's not here today mentioned the old way of lowering standards in order to get certain people in, which is something she didn't want to see happen. And to me, with this interim standard, we're kind of doing that. And so my suggestion was to suspend the interim standard and follow Section 7, which requires by, I believe, July 2018, for each agency to come up with their proposal to be accepted, voted on, implemented by this body. And so there is a timeline to it. It's a little over 6 months to get that. The fire department, by the draft that I've submitted as part of my testimony, we're a little bit ahead of the curve because, again, this is the exact same work performance evaluation tool that I submitted back in 2014 as an option. And, I'm just asking you to consider it. But again, going back to being a member of the Post, I will support the majority of what voted. And so, as Senator Nelson stated earlier, we did bring this interim standard to her, and you're just putting it into law. So, I have no choice but to support that. But I do want to just put it in record and ask you to consider at this level, because you also have your quorum, and you can err on the side of the employee and reduce the stress level of this current standard and even the interim standard. Because I will tell you what's going to happen, and I'm going through it right now as we speak. We implement standards and grievances are filed. When you have an interim standard, that grievance will be entertained probably by the, after July 2018, when we've hopefully adopted a secondary standard or another standard. And now the CSC, the commission, is going to come in and look at this and say, why are we holding this employee accountable to a standard that no longer exists, or to a standard that does not have, and you say, implemented by law? You give lawyers, 100 lawyers in a room, and every single one of them will tear it apart. And that's what we face as administrators and chief officers at the Civil Service Commission, standing here to defend that. And what has worked for me as a fire chief in handling these cases was reliance on existing, validated, proven facts that have existed, that's out there, using national accreditation and everything else in that respect, to prove why it's appropriate and why we do what we do, and therefore the actions that were placed upon that employee in this, for instance, adverse action is appropriate because we need to gain compliance with whatever standard we put in place. We have to gain compliance. And so I am asking on behalf of our firefighters that we just suspend this, admit that maybe it wasn't the right test and suspend it, and then allow us to come back to you as you've accepted in this bill by including it by July 2018 with an alternate or a more appropriate test per agency. Now, maintaining a one single standard, that's fine as long as it's appropriate for all of us. Fire service is very different from police services, which I assume is very different from custom services or DYA for that matter. So I just think that we need to recognize that, and that was the reason for my recommendation.
Thank you. Just one more comment, Madam Chair. And this has to do with, we can come out with any kind of standards. I don't care what kind of standards we come up with, but I honestly believe that the drummer, the leader in that organization is going to be the one to set the drum beat. I know that in the case of the court, it was a pretty high pass rate. And I also know that the Chief Justice at the time, the head of that agency, got personally involved in their program. And so to expect the subordinates, the rank and file, to get with the program, and that there's just a half-hearted support by the upper echelon of the organization, it's just contradictory. And it's always bothered me, even since the last hearing, when I heard some senior field grade officers, I won't name the agency, who came up and said, physical fitness is a, what do you say? It was a choice, was not a, he basically said, hey, if they want to be physically fit, let them be physically fit. Otherwise, leave them alone. And that was coming from the top. And that just blew me away. And if that's the kind of attitude we're going to have for the upper echelon, I don't care what kind of program you got, it's not going to work. And so people at this table have got to set that drumbeat. And that's all I ask from you guys. So please assess that, and I'm not looking for Superman.
Yes, sir.
And quite frankly, your agencies are role models for this community. Yeah. And so you've got to set that, and that takes some work too. It takes some sacrifice on your part. Thank you.
Senator, could I also address some of the issues that you had brought up earlier? First of all, what was changed when we, going back first of all, there's a Cooper standard that for law enforcement, that is the majority of the law enforcement in the United States. And what it recommends is that it has three factors. One is statistically based, performance-based, and scientifically based. And when we looked at them, and during our discussions, 3 or 4 years ago, we just didn't have the money to go and have a elaborate study and research on this. The other part was that many of us are military personnel also, for veterans and all, and we looked at that Air Force standard as possibly a good standard to start because they did all the research already. It's probably one of the few military services that actually did all that stuff where it's scientifically based and performance based and what have you. Going further, as we did our testing, we weren't able to meet, many people weren't able to meet those standards. What was recommended by the AG's office, okay, was that because of looking at the stats, is to reduce the 39 inches, to remove that, and to make it to 1 mile. That was the only change that we recommended. It wasn't people might say it's a drastic change. I thought that that was adequate for given that this was the beginning of our physical fitness program. But the AG said that why don't we try that and then see what happens. When we did that and we retested the personnel, we had higher stats. It wasn't like, dramatic, but we saw an increase, maybe 60, 70% were passing. So that was the whole premise behind it. And at the time, too, we decided that from reading in the post-commission law, it says equivalent to the Air Force standards, anything. So in our minds, we said, well, that means we have the ability to make some changes. However, the AG's office came back and says, no, you can't make any changes. You got to go to the legislature and start this whole AAA process again. So that's the history of it. It wasn't, and everyone felt that we could work with that issue with regarding to reducing, eliminating the 39 inches on the waist and doing the 1 mile. And then with the premise, however, that we could increase it later on if necessary, or as we progress and had more, stats regarding passing and all that. So it's, of course, a cultural change and an institutional change, and it required some changes. And, but I just wanted to kind of give you that background behind it, sir. That's all.
Thank you, Senator Adams. Senator Torres? Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate all the discussion about the standards and how we have to have a baseline standard. I think one thing that we have to understand also is that it's important that we recognize that fitness is universal, and there are different components of testing fitness that we shouldn't disregard. And when I was looking at the revised standards, the interim standards, I was quite disappointed, because what I did in trying to understand where the commission came to this is I looked at the Air Force standards and tried to follow that. It's quite voluminous, but I took the time, and what I found that was interesting was one of the basic telltales of fitness is waistline circumference, and we chose to eliminate that, which I thought was not so smart. But notwithstanding, the other thing that I thought was quite startling was the fact that we reduced the time for the run and the walk from the time that it would take for a 1.5 mile walk or run to, we swapped it out with the time it would take for a walk. And what I want to point out to everyone is, while we're barking about this is unfair, you can't do this to us, what startles me about this is that time is just a hairline off of high-risk status. So we're not talking about fitness that would put us at a moderate level or at a low level, but just below, seconds below high risk. So as an employer and as a legislator, I would think, if I had a responsibility to my employees to ensure that they are safe in their positions, I would have a cause of action if I knowingly put you in a situation that was going to cause you to have a heart attack or cause you to get injured and die. And that's the responsibility that I hang over my head. And I think that most of us recognize that. So while we're thinking about the livelihood of a person, what this really is about is the life of a person. And whether that person gets through the job at the most critical times where he's required to perform the most strenuous of duties, that he's going to survive that. And that's really what this is about. So I hope that when we go through an interim standard, I think that the adjustment for the run and the walk is too lenient, because honestly, it's like asking my grandmother to do it. She would do it. My grandmother's nowhere near the status of your officers. So please rethink that, because it's too easy. The waistline was eliminated. I don't know if that's a cultural discriminatory component that we have to take in. I don't want to believe it. I don't want to believe that we're genetically fat or that our bones are somehow larger. I mean, let's be real, because I want to go back to the idea that it's all about health. This is all about health, not about losing jobs. But I did want to ask, in the rules and regulations for the Guam Post Commission, there is a section where it requires that a fitness coordinator be engaged. Do all agencies have a fitness coordinator and an educational program in place? Okay. And then it also provides in the same section the DOA can be utilized for physical testing, physical fitness testing. Is that something that that is needed that hasn't been fulfilled, or is it not a need right now with any of the agencies? Anybody, are you okay with your physical fitness testing component?
Senator, we are,
Okay.
based on what we've assessed already and how we've pushed forward with this. We're okay with the programs that we've implemented already. Speaking on behalf of the Guam Police Department, we do have a general order that governs physical fitness in the Guam Police Department.
Okay.
So we're comfortable in moving forward with that. In discussions with the rest of the Post Commission, each agency has or is developing a physical fitness program that they're moving forward.
Okay. And what I just want to reemphasize with everybody is that, you know, we understand that there was this mandate that required everything to happen within a timeline. We know that we're up against a timeline and it's unrealistic. But I think that when we look at how to implement an interim standard, let's stop kidding ourselves. At the last public hearing that we had on this bill, I proposed to everybody, if you're going to go so far, just get rid of the darn thing, because you're kidding yourselves. And I don't want to ever be in a position, and I've been the head of several agencies on Guam, I would never want to be in a position where I knowingly allowed someone to do a job that they were not fit to do, because I don't want to have to face that widow and say that I knew your husband was heart attack material and I let him go out there. That's not what any of us want to do, and that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about the time for the run and the walk, let's get that to where it is at least above a mid-range or slightly below. But to be just a hairline off of high risk, I think is not doing anybody any good. And if they're really that unfit, then maybe you shouldn't put them in that predicament until you can work them up to the level. You know, and that's what I'm just imploring everybody. I appreciate Senator Atta's comment about the former Chief Justice and his take in this, and I speak from the point of view where I've been following this program and I understand the challenges, and I've been involved in it personally just to see how realistic it is, and it is realistic. He's reached a level of fitness that he wasn't at 2 years ago. I've reached a level of fitness where I wasn't at 2 years ago. So the agencies can get everybody on board much the same way I personally took that challenge on. So it's doable, but let's do it within a point where we're not just, you know, getting by, where we're actually addressing what this whole post issue is about, and it's about the health and well-being of the officers, because I would never want to attend a funeral because we kidded ourselves just to keep your job. I'd rather that you have your life and the less than optimal job that you desire. That's just how I feel, and I apologize if that offends you, but I think right now we have an obligation to our families, and I have an obligation to you to make sure that I'm not kidding you by passing something that's not going to do any of you any justice, because then I'd be very embarrassed for myself. So, Sidus Maasi, keep up the good work. We can figure out a solution, but let's figure out a solution that doesn't compromise health, because that's really what we're about, Chief. And, you know, Chief, I don't want you to lose officers, but, you know, I would rather that they take a desk job than drop on the streets.
Senator, thank you very much, and I appreciate your comments, and I do understand where you're coming from. I would just like to point out that while you reference the interim standards to be below a certain mark, that is being based on the premise that the AFI is the end-all, be-all. And I will tell everybody in this room, as I look around, that the AFI is not the end-all or the be-all. As a matter of fact, the inclusion of the AL or of the AFI was like taking a square peg and trying to put it into a round hole, because it doesn't apply to the law enforcement entity on this island. It was designed specifically for service members in the United States Air Force. Who here is an active duty service member in the United States Air Force? We're not. We're law enforcement officers. And to say that a DOC guard is going to drop to 39 inches when all the prisoners they guard in there are above 39 inches and could throw them around like rag dolls is probably erroneous also.
But Chief, let's just be clear that the standard was adopted based on something that was scientifically proven and based on research. So if we have nothing to go by,
But
as
that research
Chief
doesn't
Camacho,
apply to the law enforcement community here.
But my point, but I'm not defending the decision made by the Post Commission. I'm just referencing the fact that your basis for, Post Commission's basis for adopting that was that it was an established standard based on research. Now, if you want to modify it, that's fine. But what I'm saying is we shouldn't modify wellness to a level that really is outside the scope of what universal wellness is and universal fitness is.
I understand that, but the
Yeah.
AFI is not universal wellness and fitness is not the AFI.
But for purposes of this discussion, we're dealing with modifying a standard that was adopted. And of course, when we're looking at the adopted standard, I was also comparing it to what your adopted standard is.
I
You're
realize that,
modifying.
ma'am, and all I'm saying at this point, not trying to be argumentative, all I'm saying is we need to get out of the mindset that we need to go back and compare everything to the AFI. Because that's the reason why we're asking for agency-specific standards, to get out of the mindset. The problem is that we planted in our seed, in our brain, the seed called the AFI, and that has nurtured over years. So we're all basing ourselves on that standard, and now we're even calling it a universal standard. The United States Marine Corps and all the other branches of the service would beg to differ that the AFI is the way to go. The Army begs to differ that the AFI is the way to go. They have an Army regulation which is very different from the AFI. So I would tell you that trying to take the AFI and say that it's a universal standard and say that we in the Post Commission and the agencies, the law enforcement agencies on this island are dipping below a standard that is putting ourselves in jeopardy, while I understand where you're coming from, Senator, and I agree, but we shouldn't base ourselves on that standard of the AFI. And that needs to be determined by the research and development team within the Post Commission. And that's all I'm trying to say, Senator, is...
And that's why we look forward to what you would come up with per this law in July of 2018. And I'm not doubting how you arrived at it. I'm not doubting where you're going to go with it. I'm just acknowledging that while we make all these discussions, we just have to be realistic about the standards and whether, in fact, we're doing ourselves justice from a health perspective. That's all.
I agree.
Yeah, but I know where you're coming from, and I wasn't part of the decision. You guys were. We agree that we need to fix it. That's good. Let's just make sure we fix it to where it's actually not something that's so ridiculous that we shouldn't even have it.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I'm saying.
I
But thank you,
understand.
Chief.
Thank you, ma'am.
Senator Castro? Senator Munoz? Okay.
All right, I'd like to thank all of you at this time for submitting your concerns and your testimony and for this dialogue. I'd like to call up some additional folks that would like to give some testimony. If I don't call your name, just please feel free to come up to the table. Tim Santos, Stephen, he's from GPD. I don't know, I can't understand your last name. Yes, that's you. Okay. And anybody else who would like to give testimony, please feel free to come up. Okay. And then we'll just go down the line and please introduce yourself, what agency you are from, and go ahead and feel free to share how you feel or add some insight. Thank you. We'll start with Altia Faison. Sorry.
Good morning, Jusmasi, Madam Chair, honorable senators. My name is David Afeisen. I'm the superintendent of Department of Youth Affairs Youth Correctional Facility. Thank you for having us discuss this in regards to our standards and our concerns. At this time, in regards, if I may, dispensa wanabay na tigof claro lo dispensa wanabay na to comprendio faisina. We're at a crawl, walk, and run phase that we're looking at. From this military perspective that we've been comparing it to, we've done the crawl phase, but from my perspective with regards to DYA, we've jumped into the run phase without looking at some of the other factors that have affected operations directly into our unit, into our operations. And we sincerely appreciate a lot of the thoughts, even with post-commission, with our chairman, with Chief Cruz, discussing and looking at changes and some of the things that we can look at directly within our division, within our departments, and what we need to change. Law enforcement at a macro level compared to military at a macro level, we have to also consider that there's several branches, as discussed earlier, and each of them has their standards for their operations and for their missions. In regards for us to continue to comply with one single standard under AFI, that is one of the challenges that we have also been faced within our department, within Department of Youth Affairs. And if we can use that same comparison and also break it down to where, in regards to military and law enforcement, let's compare law enforcement now and say there's several branches, including DYA, and that we sincerely appreciate that we're going to be highly part of the voting portion of this. But we also have our standards in regards to operations for juvenile delinquents, juvenile clients who we consider our status offenders or non-status offenders. And this is where we've grown. This is where we've actually evolved, and we want to continue to actually be part of this and meeting standards. We are a growing department. We're not so huge, but our standard factors are simply stay fit, work with the clients, report to work, and attendance is always a priority to ensure public safety as the first mission. That we always achieve. And our second mission is trying to match the PFQT that's required at this time. We have been conducting our actual diagnostic tests. We have been conducting a lot of runs, push-ups, and sit-ups, and we have evolved to that point where a lot of our officers have been taking it. A lot of our officers have been doing it on their own. A lot of officers have had that morale to continue to grow and to continue to get healthier. And the biggest concern that I want to advocate in regards to this status, as our officers are here also from DYA, is the focus on concern is if we fail the PFQT, what's the status? Are we losing a job? Are we going to be losing our employees to support operations? And our numbers are low. The second is the result of that concern is directly to the officers and their family. So as a whole, I know we've discussed this before, but just in order for us to consider and for us to continue to comply with what is being required, as well as meeting post-commission standards, we want to continue to grow, but focus and let's sincerely roll up our sleeves and look at where we're at in regards to operations, specifically at the front lines, down to my units that I have in control of, even at this time with weathers being this poor, that we have to sincerely lock down a unit, an F unit, with a lot of clients who are in there for offenses and ensure that the public safety is actually not jeopardized. But if we continue to look at just standards and focus our intent on just meeting a standard versus our original intent of ensuring that the officers show up for work and ensure that public safety is never jeopardized, that's one of the things I kindly ask for us to always throw into our actual formula, our overall formula in regards to what we're trying to meet overall for law enforcement. So with all due respect, Jesus Masi, and this is one of the things that we're challenged overall, and we can, if I may, maybe look at how I can discuss further as the superintendent some of our other challenges in regards to our shortfall from DYA, where we're stuck in regards to financial differences as well as uniform status, as well as something as basic as firearms, weapons qualification, and meeting other standards that are being pushed as Category 1 officers, as Level 1 officers in the law enforcement in regards to this being pushed. That is where we are caught between a rock and a hard place as juvenile officers who have to be really up to par as peace officers, but simultaneously be as clinically up to par with suicide intervention, mentoring, big brother approach. So I require our officers inside juvenile corrections and youth corrections na siguro na you guys are up to par with being an enforcer of law enforcement. Lo, at the same time, na mauli kam ju sa tunga na stipat gun na masit sa, we have to help them make a better decision. And that's where we're at. We're caught between that prospect of trying to meet two standards and focus directly on our physical fitness to ensure that the public safety for those guys committing offense, and at the same time, for the same individuals who we need to support outside in the community for additional support. So, Sizus Masi, Senators, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Superintendent Efeisen.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Hafaday, Senators of the committee. I'm Colonel Philip S. N. Tyron, Jr. from the Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency. I'm here to provide testimony on Bill 165-34 relative to the amendments to the Post-Physical Fitness Standards codified in Title 27, Chapter 3 of the Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations. My testimony is short this morning, Madam Chair. Concerning subsections of subsection 3105, there exists conflicting language on line 7, page 5, covering section F, indicating Guam licensed healthcare provider, and then is codified in paragraph IA. The language converts to a person licensed to practice medicine and is not specific as to where the person practices. I suggest the language reflect the same intent of authority of that being a person in Guam licensed to practice medicine. In this regard, subsection 3105 IA should also be amended to reflect my concern. Specifically, the amendment should read, peace officers shall only be allowed a waiver of their fitness test if deemed appropriate by a person licensed to practice medicine on Guam. They are considered disabled under the Americans with Disability Act and Fair Labor Standards Act or court case decisions. Also, with regard to this section, specifically the waiver of their fitness test granted by this section, with this waiver, the Post Commission would be incapable of denying, suspending, or revoking the individual's certification. An individual who can obtain a waiver of any four of the four unsatisfactory PFQT scores would be waived from failure as defined in subsection 3105F. Being able to successfully achieve the waiver creates the condition for a class of post-certified peace officers who never meet the criteria of failure and thus may remain post-certified with ever passing a PFQT. The rules and regulations lose their effectiveness of the intent to establish peace officer standards because of waivers deemed appropriate. I express similar concern with subsection 3105, language on line 7 to 8, page 5, covering section F stating, when a peace officer receives 4 unsatisfactory PFQT results within a 12-month period and a Guam licensed healthcare provider has ruled out medical conditions precluding the peace officer from achieving a passing score, the Post Commission shall deny, suspend, or revoke the individual's certification. All PFQT tests shall be provided to the Executive Director within 15 calendar days after the completion of the PFQT. In this section, we address peace officers who do not have medical conditions precluding the peace officer from achieving a passing score. In this situation, the Post Commission shall deny, suspend, or revoke the individual's certification. However, this section fails to address the follow-on or follow-up actions required for those peace officers who are found to have medical conditions precluding them from passing the PFQT or who successfully acquire waivers deemed appropriate. I suggest that subsection 3105I be amended to read as follows, and I'm not going to read the sections, save for the last one. My recommendation is that we add a subsection C. In a 12-month period, peace officers who receive 4 unsatisfactory PFQT results who are found to have medical conditions precluding them from passing the PFQT and who are not subjected to post-commission denial, suspension, or revocation of peace officers' post-certification because of their PFQT medical preclusion conditions described in subsection 3105F, and peace officers allow waiver of their fitness test deemed appropriate by a person licensed to practice medicine on Guam as specified in subsection 3105IA shall be subjected to Government of Guam, Department of Administration Rule 9.002, kinds of medical examinations, B or C, as deemed appropriate by the appointing authority and as directed by the Post Commission, except that mandatory examinations are required for peace officers meeting the conditions described herein. These requirements shall be executed by the appointing authority for the peace officer affected whenever the conditions described herein occur. I have a few add-ons. I know I submitted a written testimony, but you know, the other question that came to mind as the commission was speaking was, when you look at the folks that are agency heads that are required to take this the post-fitness test, not all of them are required to take that test. And when you find those, and you'll see those that are listed in the actual codifications, if you have an asterisk next to their name, then they're not required to take the test. I have an issue with that, because how are these members who are part of the post commission going to execute that? Would there not be some form of bias or conflict of interest that they would have to police themselves? Because the director of the Customs and Quarantine Agency must take that test. And if he doesn't, and he fails to pass it, then he's going to be held to the same standards, even though he's an unclassified employee. So I've not thought this out entirely. I'm just sharing it with you. So perhaps when you're going through your deliberations, it might be something to consider. But my concern is that there might be bias or conflict of interest. So are they going to subject themselves to being removed, right? Or what are the remedies for a director who does not pass the post test because they're required by law to do so, for those that are identified to have to do so? Also, you know, I understand the concern the chief of the Guam police had with regard to their folks that, because they submitted their requirements. The chair asked for this information to be submitted, and there were those that failed to submit them. The Customs and Quarantine Agency tested certain folks. I'm in compliance with this requirement because I volunteered to actually take this test. So I'm capable of passing the test. At the time I took the test, I wasn't preparing for a test. I just go out and work out every day and prepare myself for the job that I have to do. And going and taking that test, I passed all components. And I might say at my age, pretty good on the run, but I didn't pass the WACE. What the WACE requires is just some dieting, maybe 2 more months of dieting, and I would easily have passed that test. So the point I'm trying to make is that we have officers out there that are able to pass this test using the Air Force standard. We have our leaders that represent us in the post, and so just as we have you senators up here representing the public, they represent me. And if their decision is to go with lowering that standard, then that's the direction I guess we're heading. Subject to your questions, that concludes my testimony.
Thank you, Colonel Tyron. Sir?
Half day, ma'am. Senators, fellow public servants, I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to speak a little bit on behalf of this amendment of the bill to amend a portion of Public Law 32-232. I noted that in Section 3105, line 21 to 23, kind of made me happy when you guys struck that out, Air Force standards, because we are not Air Force. If you look at the meaning of AFI, that's Air Force instructions. Initially, if these people had passed this, they should have made it Guam instructions or GI, right? So I'm glad, ma'am, that you struck that out. I have no other questions in reference to the bill, with the exception of the slight conflict on the last part. Section 7, I believe the last paragraph of the page, last page of that section, it says whether that the physical fitness qualifications test shall revert back to previous standard adopted in Public Law 32-232, right? I saw a lot of compromise that happened, and there is a proposal that was submitted by a post, okay, leaders of our law enforcement agencies that probably they have agreed upon, or they came up with a solution not to plagiarize Air Force instructions. Not, pretty much this is our own, a little bit of a probably copyrighted portion of the Air Force instructions, but this is our own. We can pretty much say that this is our standards that's being proposed attached to this bill. So I suggest that probably in that last portion of the bill that it says that the bill December 2018, if you're not in compliance, that this bill or this amendment shall stand. So that will make an amendment to the law 32-232, right? Less complicated, unless we already have a baseline on all law enforcement agencies. And that's the only thing I have. I support the bill with the exception of that last portion of it. And hopefully that if we're not going to be in compliance, that we'll be able to apply this attached appendix A and B that's attached to this bill. And also, I would like to take this opportunity. There's some portions that was left out, and I see this is very important. I know you guys, my fellow public servants, have mentioned that you guys are concerned about our health. I just want to see probably is there probably any possibility that something will be added, something to the effect like employees participating in any off-duty physical fitness in their efforts to adhere to established law or any amendment thereof, with their agency's head's approval of any off-duty physical fitness be covered under the Department of Labor's workers' compensation benefits. That's not being covered there. This will encourage most of our guys to actually do physical fitness at our own time, knowing for a fact that approval from my chief, from the rest of the law enforcement agency heads, that we are doing physical fitness to improve ourselves. If something happens, at least workers' compensation will be covered under any circumstance that may happen while we're doing physical fitness. It might be probably too much to handle, but I think something that will probably encourage our guys to do so, because they know for a fact that it will be covered by workers' comp, because it is still part of the job, because we are police officers 24 hours a day. Secondly, in the event of an employee succumb to any, or result of any fatality or death, right, as a result of their approved physical fitness activities, families shall be given assistance needed to compensate of such loss in the minimum of $250,000 from the general fund or Section 30 money. Because, since we're copying Air Force standards, right, Section 30 money is from the military, so probably we can utilize some of that. I know it's too far-fetched. I mentioned that the last time about any compensation for our fellow police officers, law enforcement officers that died in the line of duty. It's a dream, and I love to dream. GPD will continue to serve and protect this island with or without the physical fitness standards as we have been doing in the past. History will tell you that without the set standards for any law enforcement officers, these islands were kept safe by our fellow law enforcement officers. And just to go back into the last portion about coming up with our standards, just for your information, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow public servants, okay? GPD has established a physical fitness program since 1983, amended in 1987, and another rescindment that was made in compliance with this law. So what's going to happen if this amendment is passed and we're not going to be in compliance with any other agencies that will come up with their own physical fitness standards, that the attached appendixes will be applied to all law enforcement agencies as a basic law enforcement or physical fitness qualification test, then GPD already have an established general orders as what our chief of police have stated. So, as far as the initial testimony from the last public hearing during this bill was passed, they're saying that you guys do want to reinvent the wheel. You guys reinvented the wheel for Guam Police Department because we already have an established physical fitness standards. Lastly, I know this is not really too related to this bill, but this is in conjunction to the physical fitness standards. And this is also my dream, as when the last time I testified about 2 years ago. I also would like to take this opportunity to again ask this body, my fellow public servants, to fulfill our department's goal and dream to have our own headquarters equipped with a gym that our guys will be able to take advantage of and to stay physically fit like our chief of police or like Colonel Tyrone here. That concludes my testimony. It was a short one. I apologize. It was a short one.
Thank you, Auntie. Captain Santos?
Good morning, distinguished senators. I really appreciate you giving me the time to say my piece. I didn't really intend on speaking today because the last time we had this hearing, I provided written testimony on the initial stages, and I kind of voiced my concerns. But I want to say that, first of all, in regards to this bill, I am in support of all in regards to what our directors and posts have made recommendations about extending timelines. But I want to start by saying I've heard concerns up here, good concerns from all of you senators about why are we delaying it? Why are we hanging things over our head? Why are we prolonging these things? Well, if the overall issue, like you all said, was our health and our wellness and fitness, right? And then I think we should consider myself personally, well, let me just rephrase it. I'm going to talk on my own behalf because in regards to the post in the police department, all the directors have said their piece in regards to the department. I want to talk on a human level, and I want to talk to me personally being a police officer and a person. You mentioned that, I've heard it several times about what have you been doing in the last 3 years when this thing was passed? But I also heard you guys hold these managers accountable saying you have not directed your personnel to do what they were supposed to do in these timelines. And that makes sense, correct? But when you label it and you generalize it, I want you to show that, look at me. I'm one of the big guys in the police department. I'm one of the ones subjected to that test. You think I can't climb that building over there or that fence? You think I can't direct traffic? You think I can't pull a body from a building? I can, but I don't have that waistline. I'm sorry, but I can say that in 1991, I had hair and a waistline, and I looked pretty. And aesthetically, I fit that profile of a police officer. But I could do those functions today. I still can. But I want to apply it like this. If it's wellness is what we're talking about, I don't care if you gave me the PT test today and I failed it, passed it, whatever. And I don't care what the standard is. Most police officers don't. We believe that we should be a fit department. But I say, if I take that test and I failed that test, where's the improvement plan? That's what these gentlemen and ladies and people are talking about here when they talk, give us an extension. Let us come up with a plan that's towards our department that we can move forward. You could give me that test in December and October, no problem. But give that officer that opportunity if he's there to move forward, because that wasn't given in the past. The last time I took a PT test and passed was in 1991 when Colonel Scambaluri scratched the program. I got it in 1984, and every 3 months I was taking a PT test, and I passed that thing with flying colors, not a problem. But here it comes along, this post comes along and says, or let's say there's a law that says we got to be fit. Well, okay, I understand that. But then again, our leaders come back to the point and they said they sat on it to a point where you guys addressed it. Where is it at? What are we doing with it? And then when we bring it up, they give you a broken program to which you all agree that is not the standard, or is not, it's a military standard, or it's some, whatever standard may be. I feel like I'm not being heard because I have said it in post-commission meetings early on that the police department had, or Department of Public Safety when I got in, had a PT program, and it was something that was relevant. We ran a quarter mile, we jumped a fence, we pulled a body, a simulated body. We did the things that were relevant to our department. We're not doing that now, but it just disturbs me that we're putting so much credit on this military thing. Another reason why I'm so adamant against this military thing is because at the very beginning I said, other than a hierarchy or a chain of command and wearing a uniform, we have nothing else in common with the military. We're not in the Army, we're not in the Marines, we're not in the Navy, we're not Coast Guard, whatever. We're the police department. If you want to give me a fitness standard, then give me a police fitness standard, because there's a police department out there somewhere that has one that is scientifically tested, if that's what you're concerned about. So all I'm saying is that when you look at this bill and you look at making revisions, if these guys didn't include it, I'm asking you to think about this at the human level, is that the more important part is not the testing. The more important part is the wellness, and if it's the wellness, then help the officers get there. And I'm saying give these guys the timeline to do it, to come up with their individual plans. If you want to make us have the test next week, fine. But I don't think there should be a penalty to it, because I'll tell you, if you did have us have that test right now with everybody saying their failure rate, it is what it is. You know what you're going to have before you, a bunch of failed officers that didn't pass that PT test. As for the legal challenges, do you think I wouldn't? Because if I got disciplined at any time, the only reason why there's no actions is because no one's been disciplined on it. If it came to me and says, Captain Santos, I'm disciplining because you failed that test, you're not fit for duty, prove it. Are you going to prove it like this? Because they talk about the Disabilities Act and stuff like this, but I'm going to talk about another reasonable level. I'm a commander. I'm at a station where I work at a desk. And I hate to say it, even if there was an emergency, I would be at a command post using this. And if I was, I'd be giving directions, because by virtue of rank, delegating. It's not to say that I shouldn't go out there and do it, because if all else fails and every man has to be out there and every woman, I'd be out there doing what my job functions are at the basic level, if that's what it's to be. We haven't had this fitness program in so long, but yet the job's been done. But I understand the thing about Senator, you don't want an officer to go out there and out of the fear of, because of our physical condition, that something happened to us. Well, that can happen tomorrow. That can happen right now, even before anything has changed before you. So all I'm asking is that when you look at this stuff, keep in mind that the police department and the big guys are not against a PT test, and they're not against having a fitness standard. But I'll tell you right now, it's not going to change the fact that we're not going to have somebody skinny overnight. And some people, like me and Steve here, for example, we can go say, well, then we need to drop 10 pounds in a month. He may do it, I may not, depending on my body structure and our diet and things that happen. All I'm saying is that I've never heard of anybody in the department getting a nutrition program. Now, when you talk about a lifestyle change and stuff, or what did we do in those 3 years, I want to say personal experience. 5 years. In my medical records, this is personal to me, but I'll say it. Without having to be told about post, my own condition, recognizing that I'm not physically fit, have endured several programs, went to the gym, Gold's Gym, stuff like this, even when Senator Brant McCready had his gym. The point is, both times, 2 times in my lifetime, I have dropped over 100 pounds in the condition to get myself in these conditions. Worked it, died, did everything I needed to do. Wound up with a broken shoulder, a rotator cuff, lifting weights. No one paid my medical bill. No one said I had to go out there and do that PT, but I did it because I knew it had to happen. But that's what happened to me. Then I get this fixed and I start training again, under the guidance of someone qualified to teach training, at the gym and stuff. And then I come back and I bust my knee. I wound up having a torn meniscus. Had to get surgery on that. No one paid for that. No one told me to do that. That was of my own accord. You see what I'm saying? Is that you're labeling that there's officers that sat and did nothing, but that's not true. I can only speak on my own behalf, but there are other officers, many that I know, that had work-related injuries that have these things. And then they're going to say, you wanted to do X amount of push-ups or X amount? Hey, put the standard, do what you want. But I'm just saying, when you talk about that Air Force standard, please don't label us with it, because we don't have the Air Force standard. Not in totality. We have bits and pieces of it that they're throwing in for us to apply, but there's no alternative exercises. If you can't do a push-up, I don't know, do you do a pull-up? What do you do? If you can't do a sit-up, do you do leg lifts? Because there's other abdomen-type exercises that are alternate, and they're listed in the Air Force manual, but they're not listed in the GPD manual, and it's not, so you keep saying Air Force standard, Air Force standard. We're not even using that Air Force standard the way it's supposed to be. If that's true to the word of that word, maybe I've said too much and maybe I'm rambling. My mind's everywhere. I got so much to say, but I'm just talking to you on a human level, is that not everybody is not taking this serious, and not everybody is against having a PT program or being physically fit. And I'll just leave you with that. Just be reasonable on your decision on how you address the law enforcement, because they've made a lot of good statements about how we should do these things. Myself personally, I'm not worried about the testing. I'm worried about when we get to that point where we take the test, if we're not where we need to be, how do we do it healthy to get to where we need to be? And is there going to be something hanging over that person's head that we're going to axe you or cut you? I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's what it should be, because you yourself said that's not the intention. So maybe put that in writing. Put that
May I comment on that? Captain Santos,
Yes,
message
ma'am.
delivered loud and clear.
Okay.
And I just want to comment, though, on your concerns. Your concerns are spot on. And in fact, the post-commission administrative roles provides for that. And that was why I asked the chief if they had a fitness and well coordinator. Actually asked the panel if agencies have a fitness and wellness coordinator per the one of the sections under minimum standards for employing agencies. And one of them is that you have a fitness and wellness coordinator. And then the other part here, too, is that any notice of failure provided to an officer shall serve as the initial stage of corrective action planning by the coordinator, and in conjunction with the officer's immediate supervisor, should guide the officer in a realistic plan to come into compliance. So it's contemplated that failure isn't failure, but failure is the start of a corrective plan in coordination with the wellness coordinator. So, you're absolutely right. And speaking from the perspective of an officer, a human being, that is so valid, and in fact, that was contemplated here. So that was why I asked about that. It's like, what's the next step? And that's why I interjected the thing about you can get there. Well, how do you get there? It's because collectively, you've got to get there with your supervisor and with your agency's directives. So message loud and clear, and thank you so much for sharing
Thank you,
that. I know that comes from the heart, and sometimes it's hard to put it out publicly, but it's necessary for us to hear it.
Thank you,
Jesus
ma'am.
Masi.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain Sanchez. Is there anyone else that would like to testify? Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Good afternoon, Senators. I want to thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time. My name is Captain Franklin Gutierrez, Jr. I'm with the Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency. I've been there for about 22 years. And I've been listening from the initial issues with Post when they first started the program, and listening to some of the senators. And basically the way I kind of see it is whether or not our current officers can pass the test or not. I think one of the issues is delaying and creating a standard. So my recommendation that I've also brought up to the chief, and I believe he had mentioned that today, was that our Post Commission as well as our senators look into the law and possibly implement some type of grandfather clause with our existing officers, because this is going to solve a lot of our issues with our officers. Because first of all, for three reasons. First of all of the officers that are already that are working for these agencies or in their respective agencies, they were never subject to these standards. And now all of a sudden, 20, 30, 25 years later, these standards are being dropped upon a lot of these officers. And that's the reason why we have these failing rates, is because they were never imposed. Most of these officers weren't in the military or serving in our armed forces. And the ones that do, yeah, maybe those are the officers that can pass the standards, but does that mean that they cannot do the job of their respective positions? So I just recommend that the grandfather clause be implemented for existing employees. And as far as some of the senators that also had a few statements regarding, well, how can these officers, we want them to be fit. So why don't we look into officers and take them individually and work with them in some type of wellness program and get them to a better level, but deal with them individually. And if we do create a standard, implement that standard with everybody that's being hired into the government, as you sign this document that you have to pass this standard in order to stay in law enforcement. And that's going to alleviate a lot of, I already hear from our officers that there's civil lawsuits, there's civil service issues that could arise. There's also questions about, is it inorganic? Is it unconstitutional for as a government employee to be subject to this after all these years? And so there's a lot of questions, and I see the chiefs making all these statements, and I totally agree with what they're trying to say about, yeah, we didn't join the Air Force, and the Air Force shouldn't be a standard. But yes, if we need to create a standard for all agencies, then let's create it for whatever that standard is, and let's move forward. Because after 10, 20 years, now everybody will be under that one standard. But let's do it through time and service. Don't subject officers that have 20, 30 years. These guys have mortgages, they have families, they have car payments and whatnot. And now their livelihood is on the line, and we're gonna possibly displace officers or have to fire officers or put them in desk jobs. I think that's just wrong. And for all the years that a lot of these officers have given their time and have weren't in the military but stuck with it while a lot of the officers went out and served the country, there were a lot of officers that stayed back and held the fort down. And I think there needs to be some consideration in that. So I ask you to possibly look into that into that a provision that can be, because I know that we've, for example, a fire law. If the fire department changes the fire code, I'm sure all the hotels don't have to re-outfit unless they do a new construction or modifications. But there is a grandfather clause that has been utilized in a lot of laws that have been passed by the legislature. And I think that this particular law, some type of grandfather clause needs to be implemented, but give these officers time to work out. And I'm going to give you an example. While if you're in a certain section in different agencies, sure, you could have the time. But if you're running shift work and you're running a 43-hour work week, we're so short. I mean, just like at the airport alone, I don't have time, and I cannot even afford to let any of my officers go, even with this wellness program. Whether it be the law or not, we can't. Because what's going to happen? We're going to get long lines, we're going to get complaints, and that's the real life scenario that we're dealing with right now. We also have a major drug problem. I told 2012, I had mentioned to the administration that we're at an epidemic level. And now, you know, we finally have the Mandana task force that's out there working it, and with our federal task forces. But we can't afford to lose any officers here. And I know that none of you would like to see any officers displaced because of this law or lose their job because of this law. So I just hope that you take that in consideration. But yes, let's create a standard. Let's implement it for all new officers coming in, number one. And let's create some type of wellness program for our existing officers, because everybody I've talked to, they all agree to that. They go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. We should just do that. But because we've embedded, like what Chief Cruz said, Air Force, everybody now, the public thinks that, all the law enforcements are sandbagging because now they don't want to create a standard. There was no standard. Other than applying at DOA and passing that initial test, there was no standard after that for the last 20 plus years. So if we do create a standard, let's create a standard and implement it, and let's make it fair for all. And I believe our public will be protected, and they will feel safe, and our officers will hopefully live long lives and enjoy the rest of their time in service with their family. Thank you.
Thank you. I just, Captain Gutierrez, on this notion of the grandfather clause. Now, that's certainly not novel because we apply that, at least in the construction industry, where when you build something and it was in conformance with the law at that time, but then the laws changed, and we don't expect them to tear that down, right? So we call that legal non-conforming. But once you start making changes, then you have to come into conformance with whatever the current law is. So with this notion of grandfathering in the, as you call it, the older guys, should we then say that if you are at the rank of captain and a promotion comes up for major, that in order for you to be considered for promotion to the next position, that you should be in conformance with this, or does that pretty much ice you out of that promotion opportunity? So I ask that question because I don't think you should have your cake and eat it too.
Yes, I understand your position, and that's something that the Post is going to have to decide. But when you look at the Post, the people that, and I don't know a lot of them. I know a lot of them. They're good friends of mine. But what is the common denominator of all those people in the Post? They're all prior military, and what Lieutenant Steve had just said earlier. You know, this is the government of Guam. This is not the military, and we need to kind of get out of that mindset that, you know, we're government employees, and if a standard does need to be done or some type of fitness level needs to be done, let's do it, but let's implement it in a fair way, because I think it's wrong to take an officer that has 25 years experience, that has maybe 5 more years left to retire, and put him out there and force him to run 1.5 miles. God forbid he doesn't have a heart attack, because that's happened with some officers that were in the SWAT training, for example, and have to tell their family, oh, sorry, you know, we wanted to implement these standards, and that just contradicts what Senator Torres had said, that we want everybody to be safe. But in the same time, you mentioned too, is that the intent is not for anybody to lose their job. And I think that's the main concern of a lot of our officers is nobody wants to lose their job, but we do agree that we want everybody to be fit. But to hold this over their head after 20 years, after 30 years, I mean, put yourself in our shoes. You know, what if all the senators had to create a standard, or the mayors now, because they're peace officers to an extent? Do they have to run this, you know what I mean? So we need to be kind of realistic about it. I really believe and kind of take it upon a realistic approach and just take it from there. But we're going to keep going back and forth with dates, with times, with lawsuits, with civil service. And do we really want to go down that road? And that's the question that you guys all need to ask yourself. Do we want to go down that road? Or do we want to say, hey, because you became a police officer in 2017 and you signed the waiver and these were the standards, and whatever those standards may be, I don't know. I'm not going to want to be the one to decide on those standards, but you got to take into consideration existing officers that are there. They didn't sign up for that, and maybe some of them wouldn't have joined had they known they had those standards. But to hold that over these officers after 10, 20, 30 years, I truly believe it's wrong, and that's why I argue the principle behind it. Because what is the intent? I mean, how can you do that? And if you're going to move them to another agency, I mean, what is the plan? And we're going to lose all this institutional knowledge. Guess what? The bad guys got a one-up on law enforcement again. Do we want to have that? Look at the crime on our island. We have to lock our door. We have to get alarm systems, right? We have to tin our cars. We have to do all these things because the criminal element is always going to be there. And I truly believe that my colonel had said this one, you know, we always have one person on our side, and that's God. And I love this island, and that's why I never left. We never joined any federal agencies. We stayed here because we love this island, and I hold it very close to my heart. I'm very passionate about what we do at our agency. And a lot of our officers are just really, really torn about this whole post issue, about, like you said, kind of holding this over our head after all these years. And I just want you to consider that. And maybe the grandfather clause, or in some type of scenario or some type of form, could apply. Because there is a grandfather clause in our existing law, if I'm not mistaken, relative to certification from another agency or from an off-island, or if you've been in law enforcement at a certain day or something like that. And maybe some of that could apply to and the one thing that bothers me, and I really hate to bring this up, I don't want to name any names, but through talking with somebody connected with the Post, when I did bring up the grandfather clause, what was told to me was, well, you know, we have some officers that are kind of overweight or whatever, and, you know, this is a way to kind of either get them to retire or to kind of force them out. So when I heard that, I started to question, what is the intent of this bill? Because what you're saying and what I'm hearing here are two different things. So I'm confused now. Is the intent to instill trust in the public? Because GPD is doing a great job right now without the Posts, right? Could some of the officers afford to lose 10, 20 pounds? Maybe, you know. Do some of them need to maybe gain some weight? But if you look at Chief St. Nicholas with the fire department, he gives another scenario in the last testimony about, I have some guys that are real small that can fit in the small hole that can, for rescue operations, or I have some big guys that I need to kind of anchor down the rope. So you can't compare the military to law enforcement. And then even at that, when you start breaking down the customs role and GPD's role and fire's role and probation, and we all have our little specialties of what we do. And I think if we want to create a standard, if we want to look into it, I think maybe looking at psychological issues with officers and, you know, maybe looking at the mental issues, that would be more important, because if you pull out a gun, taking a shot is not going to take 20 push-ups or 10 sit-ups or whatever it may be, right? It's, are you going to pull that trigger or not, and make that determination. So I think this is more important than, you know, brains is more important than brawn for that matter. And I just would hate to see our law enforcement go down because of this program, because now the intent has changed.
Thank you, Captain Gutierrez.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify? No? Okay. I just want to address some things. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming here today and your continued service to our island. I want to thank the Post Commission, the chiefs, everyone that submitted testimony in reference to this bill. We will work to address some of the concerns. Just to re-clarify that this bill, the standard we are putting in place, it was voted on by the Post Commission. And like I said, some of the public safety agencies weren't there, but they still manage quorum. We're addressing can't compare this to the military, right? We're addressing that concern, and that was a big concern in our informational hearing, which is why we're giving some time for each agency to implement their own PT program and plan. And I just wanted to be known for the record that when we first started this term, I met with most of our public safety agency heads, and I asked them, are you ready to pass the post? Are your guys ready to pass the post? And I got north and south. We're at 80%, we're at 90% pass rate, north and south. Then, a month later, I looked at my chief of staff, I said, I think we need to have an informational hearing on the post. And then the same gentleman that gave me the north and south came up before the informational hearing, this panel, and said, we're going to lose 50% of our force. And so for me, that was disappointing to hear. 1 month I get north and south, a month later I get we're going to lose 50% of our force. But what was very clear to me is that we needed to make some changes, and we needed to listen to what the agencies had to say. And we needed to implement something to accommodate these agencies so that our officers are successful. And this, since February and March, we've been working with the agency heads for this compromise. And I want to thank everyone for putting in their effort. When we asked for information, when we asked for standards on their current testing process, they sent it to us. So I want to thank GPD and GFD for sending your stats. But I do also want to clarify that it bothers me that we're addressing this issue at the 11th hour. I just asked Senator Uggan, was there an informational hearing last year? There was none. The Post Commission did not come to the legislature and say, hey, we have a problem here. And now it's the 11th hour, and everybody's in an uproar. But what we must stay focused on, we need to address this issue, we need to uphold a standard, and that every agency is given the authority to implement their own standard, and we will work with the Post Commission to adopt the standard by July 2018. So I thank all of you for coming here today. We'll still be accepting written testimony for the next 4 days. And if there's nothing else, this concludes our public hearing. Thank you.